Religion in the Aztec world was not something reserved for temples or special occasions. It was the structure that held the world together. The rising of the sun, the coming of rain, the timing of war, the fate of rulers, the duties of priests, the pattern of the calendar, and even the destiny of the dead were all bound to sacred forces. What modern people often separate into politics, agriculture, astronomy, ritual, and daily life formed a single living system in Aztec society. Their universe was not stable by default. It had to be maintained, nourished, and renewed. At the center of that worldview was a powerful idea. The present age was not the first world, and it would not necessarily be the last. Aztec tradition spoke of earlier suns, earlier eras of creation, each one ending in catastrophe. The current age was the fifth sun, a world still alive, but never guaranteed to remain so. The sun moved across the sky only because divine sacrifice had made it possible, and because human beings continued to honor the gods who sustained it. Religion, then, was not simply about reverence. It was about reciprocity. The gods had given of themselves, and human beings owed them a debt. That debt shaped every level of life. The Aztec pantheon was large, but several deities stood at the heart of religious life. Huitzilopochtli was one of the principal gods of Aztec religion, a solar and war deity closely tied to the rise of Tenochtitlan itself. Tlaloc ruled rain, storms, and agricultural fertility, and was both revered and feared because he could nourish the land or destroy it. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was associated with priesthood, books, the calendar, and Venus. Tezcatlipoca, a major deity of the night sky, represented another powerful dimension of cosmic order, while Tonatiuh embodied the fifth sun itself, a sun whose movement and survival required sustenance. These were not distant figures in myth alone. They were active presences in the ordering of society. Each of these gods also expressed a different truth about the Aztec world. Huitzilopochtli represented conquest, rulership, and the solar destiny of the Mexica people. Tlaloc represented the deep dependence of even the most powerful empire on rainfall and harvests. Quetzalcoatl linked sacred knowledge with civilization itself, binding religion to writing, learning, and priestly authority. Tonatiuh expressed a more unsettling truth. Life continued only through struggle and renewal. Aztec religion was therefore not merely polytheistic in the simple sense of having many gods. It was a way of mapping the entire world through divine powers, each tied to a force that mattered for survival. The Aztecs also inherited and reshaped older Mesoamerican traditions, rather than inventing their religion from nothing. Tlaloc's imagery reaches back to Teotihuacan. Quetzalcoatl had long existed across Mesoamerica, and Tezcatlipoca's cult was associated with Toltec influence in central Mexico. Even the broader religious background of Mesoamerica shows what Britannica calls a fundamental unity across the region, with many gods tied to essential human activities such as war, rain, fertility, and rulership. Aztec religion was therefore both local and inherited, a Mexica expression of older sacred traditions, reworked in the service of a powerful imperial state. That continuity is one reason the gods felt so embedded in the landscape. Mountains mattered because the Tlaloc, the rain powers associated with Tlaloc, were believed to dwell on mountaintops. Venus mattered because Quetzalcoatl was linked to the morning and evening star. The south mattered because Huitzilopochtli was the resuscitated warrior of that direction. The night sky mattered because Tezcatlipoca ruled within it. Aztec religious life did not place the divine outside the natural world. It read meaning into the land, the heavens, the weather, and the directions of space. The cosmos was a sacred geography. Sacred time was just as important as sacred beings. The Aztecs lived by two interlocking calendars. One was the Tonalpohualli, a 260-day ritual cycle made from 20 named days rotating through numbers 1 to 13. The other was the 365-day civil year, divided into 18 periods of 20 days, followed by 5 additional days considered unlucky. These two cycles did not just measure time, they organized it into a sacred pattern. Specific day combinations were associated with particular deities, and the ritual cycle was used for divination. The civil cycle fixed the sequence of festivals that marked the ritual year. In other words, time itself was religious. Because of that, Life unfolded inside a schedule of meaning. A child's birth date could carry divine associations. Ceremonies were not held whenever convenient. They were set within a cosmic rhythm. Each of the 18-20-day periods had its own festival or set of observances, often dedicated to particular gods. The 5 Namantami days at the end of the year were treated as dangerous and unlucky, a reminder that transitions in time were moments of instability. The Aztec calendar was not just a practical tool for counting days. It was a religious machine that bound society to the heavens. Nothing showed the union of religion and public life more clearly than Tenochtitlan itself. At the heart of the capital stood the sacred precinct, the ceremonial center not just of the city, but of the empire. Within it rose the Templo Mayor, the most important temple in Aztec religious life. The structure stood about 90 feet high and consisted of twin pyramids side by side on a huge platform. One sanctuary was dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, the other to Tlaloc, the god of rain and agriculture. In that pairing alone, the priorities of the Aztec state were made visible: warfare and fertility, conquest and nourishment, imperial power and agricultural survival. The temple was not just a place of worship. It was a statement about the universe and the empire's place within it. The Templo Mayor was enlarged again and again across 7 major building phases, and according to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, rulers expanded it to celebrate coronations, honor the gods, and validate the power of the Aztec Empire. This meant that architecture itself became political theology. When a ruler built upward, he was not only raising stone, he was renewing the city's covenant with the divine and displaying his right to govern under sacred authority. The ceremonial center around the temple made that sacred order visible on a grand scale. The sacred precinct could hold thousands of people and contained not only temples, but priests' quarters and schools for training young noblemen for the priesthood. Religion was therefore built into the very design of the capital. The empire did not simply have a religion. It staged religion at its center, in a space where authority, education, spectacle, and ritual all converged. Within that system, priests were indispensable. Aztec priests were not marginal figures separated from public life. They formed an organized and graded hierarchy, maintained schools known as kalmacacs, instructed sons of the nobility and some commoners, oversaw temple rituals, and preserved sacred knowledge. Many novices eventually left priestly training and went on to perform political or economic functions, which shows how deeply religious education overlapped with governance. Others remained permanently in the priesthood and lived at the kalmacac. Priestly life was therefore not just about worship. It was about managing the sacred knowledge on which society itself depended. The high priesthood also reflected the balance at the center of Aztec religion. Tlaloc's high priest ranked as an equal to the high priest of the sun god's cult, and Huitzilopochtli's high priest stood among the 2 heads of the Aztec clergy. That balance mattered. The empire required victory in war, but it also required water, crops, and continuity. The dual structure of the Templo Mayor and the priesthood surrounding it revealed a world that was never governed by one force alone. Survival demanded the favor of many powers at once. Yet Aztec religious life did not begin and end in the monumental spaces of the capital. It also reached into homes and local communities. The Metropolitan Museum notes that Aztec temple models were distributed widely and functioned as tools of empire that promoted state religion at the household level. These models could act as stand-ins for temples or as earthly homes for deities. That detail matters because it reminds us that religion was not only something people witnessed in the city's great ceremonies. It entered domestic space. The empire projected sacred order outward, carrying public religion into private life. This helps explain why Aztec religion was so powerful. It linked the household hearth to the empire's greatest ceremonies. It linked local devotion to state ideology. It linked the duties of ordinary people to the survival of the cosmos. Even when ritual was centralized, belief was lived everywhere, in the home, in the calendar, in the naming of days, in offerings, in festivals, and in the constant awareness that divine powers shaped the world at every level. Offerings were one of the most visible expressions of that relationship. In Aztec religion, giving was not symbolic in a loose sense. It was an obligation grounded in a cosmic debt. Bloodletting was practiced, and human sacrifice was also a regular part of major religious life. especially in rites linked to Tanatia and other deities. But sacrifice should not be reduced to modern shock value. In Aztec thought, the gods themselves had sacrificed to bring the world into being and to set the sun in motion. Human beings responded by feeding that divine order. In that logic, sacrifice was not senseless cruelty. It was a hard form of reciprocity, terrifying perhaps, but coherent within the worldview that sustained it. That logic was especially clear in the cult of the sun. Britannica notes that the Aztecs believed the sun god needed daily nourishment in the form of human blood and hearts, and that they, as people of the sun, were required to provide that sustenance. This belief tied warfare to religion in a direct way. Captives were not merely spoils of war. They became part of a cosmic economy. Military success fed ritual life, and ritual life in turn justified warfare. In the Aztec world, war, sacrifice, and cosmic survival were deeply entangled. Certain annual festivals show just how fully this sacred geography entered public ritual. Months dedicated to Tlaloc included ceremonies tied to rain, mountain spirits, lake water, and agricultural renewal. Rain priests bathed ceremonially in the lake, imitated waterfowl, and used ritual instruments in hopes of obtaining rain. During Panquetzalistli, the festival of Huitzilopochtli, the city filled with processions, dancing, and rites centered on the god's image and on the public affirmation of warrior identity. These ceremonies were not abstract theology. They brought the divine powers of mountain, storm, sun, and war into the streets and plazas of the living city. The same religious system also shaped the yearly cycle of public festivals. The 365-day year was divided into 18 20-day periods, and each period had ceremonies dedicated to specific deities or themes. Some rites focused on rain and fertility, others on war, renewal, or the mountain spirits associated with Tlaloc. During the month Panquetzalistli, festivals honored Huitzilopochtli with processions, dances, sacrifices, and the ceremonial handling of an image made of ground maize. Tlaloc, meanwhile, was honored across several months, with rites connected to rain, mountaintops, sacred bathing, and agricultural hope. The city's ritual calendar was therefore a moving cycle of devotion, fear, petition, and celebration. These festivals were not secondary ornaments on political life. They were one of the main ways political life was expressed. Public ritual made hierarchy visible, gathered communities into common ceremonies, and affirmed that the state acted under divine mandate. When the capital celebrated, it was not only honoring the gods, it was displaying a social order in which gods, priests, rulers, warriors, and commoners all had a place. Spectacle was inseparable from belief. Ceremony was one of the empire's ways of explaining itself to itself. Religion also helped the empire absorb tribute, identity, and memory into one ceremonial order. Tenochtitlan grew into the political, economic, and religious center of the greatest empire of pre-Columbian Mexico, enriched by tribute from conquered regions, and the sacred precinct stood at its center as the place where that imperial identity was given sacred form. The rulers who expanded the Templo Mayor were not adding decoration to a wealthy capital. They were turning imperial success into visible devotion. Every enlargement announced that conquest, wealth, and divine favor belonged to the same story. No ceremony revealed the Aztec sense of cosmic insecurity more clearly than the New Fire ceremony. Every 52 years, when the 260-day ritual cycle and the 365-day civil cycle returned to the same positions, the Aztecs marked the completion of a calendar round. In preparation, all sacred and domestic fires were allowed to go out. Then, at the climax of the rite, priests kindled a new sacred fire on the body of a sacrificial victim, and from that flame, people rekindled their household hearths and began to feast. This was not an ordinary festival. It was a renewal of the world. It expressed the fear that time itself might fail, and the hope that ritual could secure another cycle of existence. That ceremony also shows how closely the private and public spheres were linked. A cosmic turning point ended not only in temple ritual, but in the relighting of household fires. The empire's survival and the family hearth were joined in a single sacred act. That is one of the clearest windows into Aztec religious life. Even the grandest ceremonies were made complete only when they entered everyday life. The household was never fully separate from the cosmos. Religion also gave meaning to death, but not in the moral framework familiar to many later traditions. In Aztec belief, the fate of the dead depended less on whether a person had lived virtuously and more on the manner of death. Those who died in war, in sacrifice, in childbirth, by drowning, lightning, or certain sacred illnesses could be called to special paradises. Tlaloc bestowed eternal bliss in Tlalocan on those associated with water and certain diseases, while warriors and those sacrificed to Huitzilopochtli entered a different sacred destiny tied to the sun. Many others, however, journeyed to Mictlan, the underworld ruled by Mictlantecutli and Mictecacihuatl. Mictlan was not merely a place beneath the earth. It was the destination for those whose deaths did not draw them into one of the more exalted afterlives. According to Britannica, the souls bound there made a 4-year journey through the 9 hells of Mictlan before disappearing or finding rest in the final realm. That belief gives us another clue to the character of Aztec religion. Death was not a simple ending, and the afterlife was not organized around a single heaven or hell. Instead, the cosmos extended beyond life in multiple directions, each path shaped by sacred categories already present in the world of the living. This vision of death also reveals something about Aztec values. Dying in battle, sacrifice, or childbirth could carry extraordinary religious meaning because these deaths were tied to forces larger than the individual. War, fertility, storm, disease, and sacrifice were not random tragedies. They were openings into divine realms. The world was charged with sacred significance from birth to death, and each form of death could place a person within a different cosmic story. For that reason, Aztec religion cannot be described adequately as a collection of gods and rituals. It was a complete ordering of reality. It explained why cities were built as they were, why rulers governed as they did, why priests guarded calendars and schools, why festivals moved with such precision through the year, why warfare mattered, why sacrifice was practiced, and why death opened onto different sacred destinations. It gave the empire a way to tie the sky to the temple to the state to the household, and the household to the fate of the cosmos. It also helps explain why the Templo Mayor stood at the literal and symbolic center of Tenochtitlan. The twin sanctuaries of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc brought together the 2 great conditions of Aztec survival: military power and agricultural fertility. One promised victory, tribute, and expansion. The other promised rain, crops, and life. The empire could not exist with only one of them. Religion held these necessities together in stone, ceremony, and myth. Seen from that perspective, Aztec religious life was both intensely practical and profoundly cosmic. It addressed rainfall, harvests, rulership, education, and warfare, but always in relation to a wider universe alive with divine presence. Nothing was merely secular. The calendar was sacred, the capital was sacred, the ruler's legitimacy was sacred, the household hearth was sacred. Even fear itself, fear of drought, darkness, disorder, or cosmic collapse, was gathered into ritual form and answered through ceremony. That is what made Aztec religion so powerful and so difficult to separate from any other part of Aztec life. It was not one institution among many. It was the language through which the world was read. Under the 5th sun, every act of devotion was also an act of maintenance. Every offering acknowledged a debt. Every festival renewed a bond. Every temple rose as a reminder that human life depended on forces beyond itself, and that the world endured only so long as those forces were honored. By the time the Spaniards entered Tenochtitlan in 1519, they encountered not simply a city with temples, but a civilization whose religious life ordered everything from architecture to kingship to the rhythm of the year. That is why Aztec religion still commands such fascination today. It presents a vision of society in which the sacred was not hidden at the edges of life, but stood at its center, immense and unavoidable, like the twin temples rising over the heart of the city.